around the world, and welcome to the very first talk from the ISAM-NIG talk series in Love with Addicted Brains. I'm Parian from the ISAM-NIG, ISAM Neuroscience Interest Group executive team. And before starting the webinar officially, I just wanted to point out some housekeeping notes for the webinar for this session. The first one is about the meeting room that, as you can see, was open 15 minutes before the session. It's going to be open 15 minutes after the session for people to keep in discussions. And the second thing is about the video recording. As you can see, the meeting is going to be entirely video recorded and it's going to be posted on the ISAM-NIG YouTube channel, and it's going to be public. So if for any reason you don't wish to be in the video, you can keep your webcam off during the webinar. The next thing is about the Q&A. At the end of the session, we're going to have a question and answer session, and we kindly advise you to raise your hand if you want to ask any questions or share any comments. And we highly encourage you to ask your questions and share your comments with us. The next thing, which is very important, is about your microphones. Please make sure that your microphones are muted during the whole talk, because there's going to be some noise and people are going to be distracted. So please make sure that the microphone is muted during that talk. And but you can turn your webcam on with the microphone muted. The next thing is about the chat space, that you can see it there. And during the talk, you can post your comments, you can ask your questions in the chat space, you can find it there. And please make sure that you're sharing your comments or your question with everyone, not just the organizers. And the last thing is about any potential technical problems with the GoToMeeting platform. So we have, as others said, we have 3 meeting staffs here. Me, Nikki, and Mehran are going to help you with any technical problems with the GoToMeeting platform. So if you have any difficulties with the platform, any problem with your webcam, microphone, or anything, you can send us messages in the private message, and we will try to take care of it. And that's it, and hope you enjoy the talk, and yeah, enjoy the meeting.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Alex Baldacchino, and I am really honored to host the first lecture of series of lectures organized by Hamed and colleagues from the Neuroscience Interest Group. This is, you might think this is something that should be happening often, but most of the time, I think, because most of the international groupings and even national groupings are run by people like myself, thinking of retirement, etc. We tend to be guilty of forgetting that actually it took us 30 or 40 years of our life to reach where we are, and hence forget that we were once very, very young. So I'm really, really honored that this has been focused and catered for the young, early career individuals, for those people who are perhaps interested in becoming specialists in addiction medicine, and people who might have had a PhD, done a PhD or postdocs, but find it really difficult to get going. And hopefully this will be an opportunity to be to engage, but also to be enthused and encouraged by people like myself. So I'm going to provide a bit of a context here. So ISAM-NIG, of course, today it's this lecture and the series of lectures later on in the year is jointly organized by the International Society of Addiction Medicine and the International Brain Research Organization. So from an ISAM point of view, really, really excited that through organizing this series of lecture, we're starting to communicate, connect with another prestigious international organization. So what is the Neuroscience Interest Group within the International Society of Addiction Medicine? We have several interest groups. One of them, or the oldest, so to speak, 3-4 years old, is a Neuroscience Interest Group. But we also have the practice and policy interest group, behavioral addiction interest group, spirituality interest group, and anthropology, and very soon anthropology, philosophy, and human science interest group. And this is again another idea that came around as we were identifying ways and means of how does an international organization with 10,000 members can be there for lots of people for lots of reasons, without diluting its values and principles of supporting clinicians to be better professionals in order to support service users and create an environment that is of good quality practice. So these interest groups came around with a view of branching, welcoming other disciplines, welcoming specialists to talk about pertinent problems, not just from a research point of view or policy point of view, but also from a practice point of view. So whoever is listening to this, you're most welcome to inquire and to be part of these interest groups. You don't need to be an ISAM member. Next, Parnian. So, of course, we have specific aims and purposes for the interest group, but and usually they're very, very simple and very straightforward. And I've put here listed the purpose of the NIG, which reflects very much the purpose of other interest groups: to increase, improve capacity of addiction medicine, international efforts, developing a roadmap, and ultimately creating consensus and creating guidelines that in the future people will use in order to create better services, but also better research methodologies. We all know Hamed Ekhtiari and with Antonio Verdaja Garcia, they are the ISAM-NIG co-chairs. Antonio will be speaking on this series of lectures, I think in December. And again, this is a reflection of the global reach, the global collaboration and consensus and critical mass that we try to achieve through these interest groups. So Antonio, originally Spanish, but working in Australia, with Hamed, originally Iranian, working in the US. You can see the combination there going on. But it's an excellent duet and fantastic teamwork together with colleagues that, like Parnian and others, have been very active within the NIG. Yeah. So, I mentioned 3-4 years in the making for NIG. And since then, we found all sorts of reasons to collaborate, to do things, to write things, to present together, to discuss things. And these are just examples. Antonio was editing a book on cognition and addiction, and Hamed, myself, and others have been involved in supporting that process by contributing in chapters. Then, of course, we have the ISAM textbook of addiction treatment, International Perspective. The second edition will be coming out in August, next month, this year. And individuals from NIG contributed to that. We had 3 NIG webinars, and again, that has been very, very popular, and through that has identified ways and means of creating Delphi methodologies around specific topics, and many others. But I think most important is, like everything else, is that we sort of have an idea of what we need to do, but until you write it down and until you sort of start discussing with peers or globally, you usually don't know what needs to be done. So this is an important piece of work done by the Neuroscience Interest Group in 2019, and that set up and established a roadmap to look at what the interest group should be focusing around in order to make, as I said before, something that's really useful at the end of the day, and really makes a difference to what is currently happening when we talk about addiction neuroscience. So please do read through this. I welcome you all to the next ISAM global conference, which will be all virtual, and that is jointly organized with the Canadian Society of Addiction Medicine. And again, I welcome you, even though you might think you're early and you're in the early stages of your career. Please do talk to your colleagues, not necessarily your peers, but also your seniors, that these conferences happen every year. And as ISAM president-elect, I do look forward to collaborate with new members, affiliate societies, and to find the right time and the right place to organize future annual Congress. I think there's one last slide, this one, and which is, I think certainly it's dear to my heart. I know it is dear to Hamid and other people within the NIG, that there needs, what we do is not just to make us feel good and important. We really, really believe that, what we need to do in this day and age is something that makes a difference. And, not just makes difference to ourselves, our career, I mean, but also makes a difference to the provision of service, which, by the way, is made up of individuals who are asking for help and asking for us to make a difference in their lives. So I'll stop that as an introduction and introduce my dear colleague and friend, Hamid Ekhtiyari. As I said, he's co-chair of the ISAM Neuroscience Interest Group. And like everything else, people who are listening right now and starting their career, you straight away right now, when someone mentions director, you get really scared. You say, oh my goodness, Hamid must be really serious and must be so busy. He won't have the time to talk to me or to mentor me. That is not true. Yes, officially, he's the director of neuroscience-informed interventions for addiction medicine at the Laureate Institute of Brain Research and director of the International Network Consortium for TES-fMRI. Director as well with the TMS Trials for Addiction Medicine, editor for scientific reports, Nature, Neuropsychological Rehabilitation. I think in a way, so now in this day and age, you can find, what Hamid has done through the internet very easily now. But I'll just mention one thing which always surprises me, is that I hope I'm not going to embarrass you, Hamid, but when I was looking at his CV, he graduated in MD Medicine in 2004. That was 16 years ago. Yes, true, Hamid? Yeah. And, considering the fact that usually to get papers published, to get grants, to get promotions, usually takes about 30 years. So I'm pretty impressed with, what you have done in the last 16 years. But for the audience, I can guarantee that he's going to set this monthly ISAM-NIG talk series into a certain momentum, which I'm sure is going to be very informative and entertaining. Hamid, to you.
Thank you very much, Alex, for the introduction. I'm really, really happy that I'm here today. I was not feeling really well during the last couple of days, so I was not quite sure I'm going to make it for today, but I'm happy that I'm here. And I'm hopeful I would be able to make it to the end of the talk. So without any kind of further ado, let's go and discuss about why we are trying to kind of run this talk series. We are hopeful to show the beauty of addiction neuroscience and encourage others, and especially young students, that is an interesting field for investment. I mean, their time and their career. And they would definitely be satisfied in long term seeing the beauty and interesting topics in addiction neuroscience. So the talk series is supposed to be a little bit personal, at least in the first part. So I'm going to give you an overview about a little bit about my personal life. I've been born in Tehran, in north of Iran, in 1978. And Tehran is a city with 14 million people that they call it home. So it's a really huge city. But my parents are originally from a part of the country that is, a small city with something like 50,000 inhabitants that is called Gonabad. And when you go to these small cities, especially in the kind of really dry parts of the country, what you can see there are kind of chains of wells in the desert. And it's quite amazing to see these chains of wells in the desert. And we call these chains of kind of wells as qanat. And what is the function of these qanat? When you see them from the kind of top, there are something like kind of spots on the desert. But actually there are kind of a chains of wells that they start from the mountains, and they bring water from the mountains to the fields. And these specific kind of system has been designed 500 BC. And these systems is still working perfectly well to bring water under the ground to these cities. And then they can make kind of gardens in the middle of the desert, and also making Persian gardens in different parts of desert in Iran. So that is the kind of the really inspiring kind of architecture that we have in that part of the world. And then they can make fields of saffron farms, and they can make kind of saffron there. And people in that part of the country are well known for being really hardworking, and also with really good and warm hearts, and welcoming to others, and they are really famous for their hospitality. So my parents are originally from that part of the country. They moved to Tehran to go to college, and then they made a family in Tehran. So now I've been born and raised in Tehran. I went to the Tehran University of Medical Sciences at the age of 18 years old. In Iran, the system is when you go from the high school, you go to the university. And for going to the medical university, you basically need to compete. You need to go to a national university exam. And something like 1 million people every year attend the national kind of university entrance exam. And from these 1 million people, something like 400,000 of them would compete for medical schools. And from those, something like the first 2,000 would go to the public medical schools, and the first less than 200 would go to the Tehran University of Medical Science. So it's a really competitive university in Iran. So I went there in 1996 and 7, and like any other medical students, I was interested to be a doctor and kind of provide services for the patients, thinking about something like plastic surgery or kind of ophthalmology, those areas. But things, basically, some really interesting things happened to me that made me really interested to cognitive science. So I met this guy, Dr. Azar Akhshmokri. At that period of time, he was psychiatric resident. He was the chief resident of psychiatry at that period of time. And then he became the faculty member in the University of Tehran. In the Institute for Cognitive Science, he was running a journal club. And we have been, in that specific journal club, people were discussing about different articles. But Trends in Cognitive Science was the main journal that we have been reading the articles from Trends in Cognitive Science. And those who know this specific journal, Trends in Cognitive Science, that we call it TICS, this journal has started to kind of publish in 1997 and 8. So it was the first years of the publication of that journal. And reading the articles in that journal basically made me really interested to cognitive science. And then we learned about a specific task that is being designed by Antonio Bechara and DiMaggio's in University of Iowa. It's called Iowa Gambling Task. And I received the first version of the Iowa Gambling Task when I was working in the Institute for Cognitive Science Studies in 1999. And those who know the Iowa Gambling Task, they know that those days were the initial days of kind of discussion about how these tasks could measure the risky decision making in the prefrontal cortex functions. So we started to design tasks, Persian versions of these tasks, and I published my first paper with one of my colleagues, Aryan Behzadi, who was a medical student in my cohort, about the different sort of decision-making tasks. And we ran our first studies in 2000. So basically, we got funded. We received the first fund to do Iowa gambling task among medical students in the college in 2000. And we published the first paper in 2002. So that was the initial steps. I was a medical student. I was just thinking about different areas of medicine. But I got really interested to the kind of risky decision making and how people make decisions and how they kind of decide, especially when we have different options and there are rewards and punishments in these options. And there is a level of uncertainty and you don't know what is going to happen in the next step. So the reward could be really delayed or the punishment could be immediate. So you don't know about the timing and the certainty of the reward and punishment and how you make the decision. So that was the initial exposure to the field of cognitive neuroscience and neuroscience for me. But I realized that if I want to kind of work in this field, I realized that probably one of the best areas of kind of working in the field of risky decision making would be drug addiction, because those who have problems with drug use, they are a good example of those who have problems with decision making. So this is a recent paper that we have recently published, kind of reviewing what we have done during last something like 20 years of working on risky decision making and how risky decision making could be affected by drug addiction. So that was the initial steps. I realized that drug addiction could be an interesting topic for further exploration, that really interesting human brain function that is called risky decision making. So I moved to Iranian National Center for Addiction Studies, where Dr. Mokri was appointed as the head of the clinical department. So I moved there as a kind of young, recently graduated medical student. And I started my own lab, my small lab, and then we have started to work in this field. And we realized that it is not only risky decision making that is affected in people with drug addiction. There are many other really interesting cognitive functions that are affected in people with drug addiction. Things like pleasure, happiness, joy, reward. We realized that all these really interesting brain functions could be affected in drug addiction. And when we work with people with drug addiction, there is a great opportunity to learn about these really exciting brain functions. Things about punishment, pain, anhedonia, fatigue, all those really interesting brain functions among human beings. Things like dependence, attachment, withdrawal, tolerance, even things like love, how we get connected to people, how we get attached to people, how these things are happening inside the brain. All these things are related to addiction neuroscience. Things like habit, compulsion, free will. Do we have any free will? How we do voluntary acts. Even things like attention. When you work in the field of addiction kind of neuroscience, you realize that one of the things that is being affected by addiction is attention and what we call attentional bias. But probably the last thing that was really made me excited about the field of addiction neuroscience was basically the change. How people, when they start to use drugs, how they can be a totally different human being. A person who is the best kind of person in the family could be stealing his mom's money to be able to kind of make and find drugs. How people, when they get dependent to drugs, could be a totally different human being. And meanwhile, in the other side, when they start to go to the recovery, some of the most beautiful human beings, I mean, spiritually human beings, you can find them among those who are in the process of recovery. And I had several kind of collaborators from people who are already in recovery, and you can see how they can be a totally different human being in the process of recovery. So these kind of interesting topics in addiction medicine basically made me in love with addiction medicine. So we started to develop kind of a lab to be able to measure these functions among drug users before starting the treatment and during the process of recovery in the treatment. So we have been using touchscreen monitors. So that was the kind of the really exciting things that I was doing when I was kind of working in the Iranian National Center for Addiction Studies. But what I realized was just some of the people, those kind of cognitive functions could be really similar to the normal people when they are behind the computers. When they are doing the task behind the computer, they could be behaving exactly like other normal human beings. And I realized that it's not just about kind of those kind of simple cognitive processes. We need to put them in the real context of drug use. When we put them in the real context, then they start to show the different behaviors. And we know that in other areas as well. When you talk about, let's say, kind of eating, you could always say, I can control my eating behavior. But when you are exposed to something that is really delicious, then you would start to behave totally different. And we have started to think about, okay, how we can put drug users in the real context of drug use to see how they can decide now, how they can kind of manage their cognitive functions when they are exposed to the real context of drug use. So that was the initial steps that was started to think about what we called cue-induced cognitive changes among drug users. So I was something like 25, 6 years old. I was working with some of the colleagues, so we started to ask drug users, what are the things that would make drug craving for you? So we started to develop a list of different sorts of cues that would make people kind of in the context of drug use. And we took a camera, we went to the kind of different places, and we tried to take pictures and photos from those contexts. And we made those photos. And we put those photos on the wall, and we have been asking patients to go inside that room and then kind of rate the pictures in terms of how much they are real, how much they could induce craving among them. And that was the first time that I was exposed to a phenomenon that we called cue-induced craving, and how cue-induced craving could be intensive. And I realized that some of the patients were basically sitting in the middle of the room, telling us that we cannot come out of the room. We are just disabled after seeing all these pictures. So I realized that it's a really powerful kind of method in terms of putting people in the context of drug use. And I realized that drug craving is a really complex phenomenon. So I started thinking about, okay, how can I help these people to manage their craving when they are exposed to drug use? That was basically the initial steps, thinking about how I can help people with drug addiction. We have started to think about, okay, how, when people are exposed to drug use, what are the brain functions that are being involved? First of all, people with drug addiction would start to think about how they can kind of increase their executive functions. They control. They start to process about the saliency of these cues. Are they important for them? How they can control their craving for them? They would have some self-directed kind of cognitive processing involved, thinking about putting themselves in the context of drug use, and also having their memory circuits activated, and also their habit circuits in terms of the motor functions that could be involved in seeking drugs and using drugs, and also things regarding the gain and loss and reward and punishment. So when you expose people to drug cues, basically you activate all these brain functions that are important in the field, that are basically kind of important in the field of addiction neuroscience. But how we can experimentally kind of explore these brain functions that are involved in drug craving? So we realized that we need to have a sort of kind of a control condition to expose people to drug cues, but also having neutral cues that they have same content without having any information regarding drugs. So this specific kind of experimental paradigm is called cue-induced craving or cue exposure, but we have control cues and also we have drug-related cues. So we can make subtraction when we expose people to these drug cues. So we realized that we need to have databases of these drug cues. So we developed different sort of databases of drug cues, and we try to have controlled conditions for, let's say, and on the kind of left side you can see opioid drug cues, and on the right side you can see the control cues. But we try to have the same content in both sides, even in terms of the hue, saturation, the contrast of these pictures. We try to control these things, getting sure that all these psychophysics features would be controlled as well. It could be for meth, not only opioids, and also even it could be controlled between opioid and meth. So that these two drugs, opioids and meth, were the major drugs that we have been interested to explore. And even we can have different sets to be able to do testing again and again. So doing a testing in one setting, doing an intervention, and do the testing again to be able to do multiple testing. So we develop different sorts of kind of drug cues to be able to experimentally assess this really interesting phenomenon. And we developed what we call the functional MRI task to compare brain activations during being exposed to drug cues and also neutral cues. And when we talk about these functional MRI tasks, one aspect would be what we call condition, drug versus neutral. And the other aspect would be about time. So when we expose people to drug cues over the time, do they have the same activation in the brain in the first exposure compared to the second exposure, compared to the third exposure? So that is another really important kind of aspect of drug cue exposure. Could they have an habituation or a sensitization when they are exposed to these drug cues? I'm going to show you some data about that as well. So when you expose people to drug cues inside the scanner, this is the activation that you see. You see there are activations in some parts of the brain, and also there are some reduced activations in some parts of the brain. And these are the networks that I told you about them. I mean, these are things related to kind of executive functions, about saliency, memory, attention, all those functions that we have discussed about. And when I basically show these activations in different parts of the brain using what we call an atlas. Here I used an atlas we call Brainotome. It's an atlas that is being developed by a group in China. When you kind of see these activations in 246 areas in what we call Brainotome atlas, you can see that there are areas that are highly activated, there are areas that are not very much activated. And these areas are related to those functions I told you. Things like memory, saliency processing, attention. All those functions all these activations could be representatives of those brain functions that are involved. So now we have this really exciting opportunity to see inside the brain. So instead of just seeing patients from outside, seeing them, okay, they are seeing the drug-related cues inside the room, and they just sit in the middle of the room, that they cannot come outside. Now I can see what is happening inside their brain, and then thinking about, okay, if I can see inside the brain, if I can see these activations, how can I change these activations in a way that they can help them to reduce their craving or control their craving? That is the kind of the dilemma that I'm trying to explore. These kind of fMRI drug cue activity paradigms or studies have been done by different groups of colleagues. I saw that kind of Rita Goldstein is with us today. She's going to be the next speaker in the kind of the next month's talk. She's one of the key leaders in the field. Has done many of these studies. We have something like over 300 publications with drug cue reactivity fMRI tasks. So it is something that people are doing in different labs across the world. It's not just something that what we are doing, it's something that people are doing in different labs. So it is something like an established platform that we can explore what is happening inside the brain when people are exposed to drug cues. Let me show you some of these activations. For example, when we show people drug cues inside the scanner, there are areas like inferior frontal gyrus, left and right, that they show constant activations, drug more than neutral, from the first exposure to the second exposure to the third exposure to the fourth exposure. So they have a sort of constant activation and pretty much similar activation in right and left side. So you can see it is not very much lateralized here, at least. Okay. But there are specific activations that are lateralized, first of all, and also they could show habituation. So, for example, in ventromedial prefrontal cortex, you can see that we can have an habituation when we expose people to drug cues. In the first exposure, drug cues would activate the brain a lot compared to neutral cues. But over the time, there is a habituation. Areas like amygdala would show lateralization. So we do not have that level of habituation in the left amygdala, but we have an interesting level of habituation in the right amygdala. And that is the kind of how amygdala behaves. So we can even explore how these different parts of the brain behave over the time and how we can kind of see, okay, if I do a specific intervention, can I change that habituation or not? The other question is, okay, are these activations could be replicated in different clinical population or among different drug users? Yes. Most of them are pretty much replicable in different clinical settings. So here you can see we have done a study with MET users, 65 MET users. We have done another group of opioid users, 22 opioid users. And you can see that the activation in ventral striatum is pretty much the same in both groups. So it is important in the field to get sure that we can replicate. So these activations could be replicated in different clinical settings. So we know that is something that is there in different clinical populations. And even when we compare these activations across these groups, doing something like a t-test between these groups, there is no significant difference between activations in these two groups. The other question is, is this signal reliable? By reliability, I mean when you do that today or tomorrow, you have the same sort of signal. So that is what we do with t-test, with test-retest. And there is a measure that we call ICC for that. And as you can see here, we have done studies in terms of seeing how these signals are replicable, are basically reliable in test-retest. And there are areas with ICC over 0.5, which is a reasonable level of reliability, especially areas like, as you can see here, the inferior frontal gyrus areas, as you can see here. Those areas that I showed you before, that they are pretty much reliable because of the kind of constant signal that they have. But as you can see here, these are the reliability of signal in different areas in the brain atom atlas. So you can see that these activations. There are, as I told you, this is the inferior frontal gyrus. There are areas that they have even the ICC close to something like 0.7, 0.8. So that these are the more reliable areas in terms of showing the signal in test-retest. So that's another really important part of having a signal inside the brain, to have a test-retest reliability, because if you want to do an intervention, you need to get sure that the signal would be there even without the intervention in the second day or in the retest setting. Okay, so I was involved in kind of developing these tasks in my MD and then in my PhD, and I received my MD PhD in 2015. And now I was thinking, okay, now I developed this knowledge. Now how can I do that for intervention? How can I I now have the measurement. How can I do the intervention inside the brain? So I received a job offer from Martin Paulus as a postdoc at Laureate Institute for Brain Research, where I'm right now a faculty member there. And I started to work with Martin Paulus as a postdoc student, thinking about how we can kind of develop interventions for drug cure reactivity. So that, and I did 2 years of postdoc thinking about that specific topic and working on that specific topic. And those who don't know where is kind of Laureate Institute for Brain Research. Laureate Institute for Brain Research is located in Oklahoma. And if you know the US map, Oklahoma is located in the middle of the south of the country, and it's north to Texas. And it is one of the least affluent states in US, with significant problems with drug addiction. And that was providing me the great opportunity to work with drug users. So I moved from Tehran to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to continue the research I was doing. And I had this great opportunity to work with a group of colleagues and collaborators and supervisors and learn how to kind of develop these interventions. I'm really thankful of those great figures in my scientific career. So we developed a sort of a model for having a better understanding about how drug craving could be happening as something like a dynamic function inside the brain. So let me just kind of make it easier for you to kind of have a better idea about the model. The model is talking about, okay, we are in an environment, we are exposed to a cue, we have attention involved, memory involved, saliency processing involved, interoceptive functions involved, control involved, and also response functions involved. So these are all the functions that are involved in the process of drug craving. And it is not drug craving, it's just food craving. But technically, the idea is the same. And if we talk about drug craving, drug has the same sort of kind of involvement of these functions in the process of drug craving. So we started to develop an intervention to target these specific brain functions. We developed an intervention called NEAT, Neurocognitive Empowerment for Drug Addiction Treatment. And these are the kind of the 16 sessions of that specific package. And this is the structure of the package. So we try to target these brain functions and in something like a hierarchical model, starting from simpler functions, adding other cognitive functions inside, and develop a more comprehensive kind of intervention in terms of kind of adding more complex brain functions to the simpler ones. This is the structure of the package that we developed. It has games and also psychoeducation materials. And I've been funded by Oklahoma Center for Advancement of Science and Technology to run the NEAT trial. And now we are in the middle of the trial, running the trial. One of the kind of major sites that we are running the trial right now is what the center we called it Women in Recovery. The initial kind of design of the package was for male subjects, but we realized that we need to go for female subjects. So we started to think about, okay, how we can find a specific character, a cartoon character that would communicate with people with drug use problem among women. So we developed different characters. We asked people, which character do you like more? Which character do you like more from these 1, 2, 3 characters? Those who are in online right now. In the chat space, you can go to the chat space and let me know which character do you like more. Character 1, character 2, character 3. And we have been thinking to have, I will tell you the features that we have been considering for selecting a cartoon character to compete. Okay, Neshad is telling number 3. Okay, now you can use the chat space to see how, okay, number 2, Aban. What are the other characters that number 1, 1, okay, good, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1. Okay, so you can see that people are kind of voting to different characters. We ended up using the character 2. One of the reasons was because of the voting that we received, and also the character is pretty much kind of race neutral. So we have been interested to have something that would be kind of interacting with people from different sort of even ethnical background. So we developed different cartoons with that specific character, and we made the cartoons colorful, and we used them in the package to be able to communicate with the patients. If you are interested to kind of know more about the basically, let me just go back. Okay, the design of the package, we put that in PsycArchive, the protocol and details about that. So you can find that in PsycArchive, the details about the intervention and the trial. Right now we are in the middle of trial, but with the kind of corona situation, we paused the trial for a while, and we are going to be back hopefully from August in an online platform. So hopefully we are moving that to an online platform. But we received feedback that this package is too long. It was 16 sessions of intervention. So we started to develop a smaller package for a shorter intervention with just 4 sessions of intervention that we call that brain healing first aid. It has all those brain functions, but it's a kind of a smaller package. And we have recently kind of put a pilot study that we have done with that package in medRxiv. So if you like, you can see the details about the new package in medRxiv. And also we kind of made some posters from those cartoons and interventions, and these posters are also available. So as soon as we develop those posters, we receive kind of feedbacks from people across the world that they are interested to have these cartoons. Now we have these posters in 12 different languages. We are receiving in something like 4 or 5 other languages, posters for other languages as well. So we will hopefully have them in something like 16 languages in something like the next couple of, hopefully, weeks. So now we have posters in different languages. So if you see that the poster is not available in your language, you can translate that in your language. We will kind of happy to help you to have the package in your language. We also moved the package to, we are working on that right now in terms of having that in an online platform, having people involved. Something like the session that we already have, the talk that we have, people would have active kind of contribution to the games and discussions in an online platform. So that's a new thing that we are doing right now. And meanwhile, with the kind of corona situation, we started to kind of add some modules about the corona situation and some extra modules about corona and the stress related to corona and COVID-19 pandemic to the package. So these are the extra modules that we have recently added, discussing about functions that are affected by the situation, the pandemic, like attention and how people can use the strategies in the process of recovery, how they can use the strategies to target those problems in the process of recovery as well. These packages are available. I think they are also available in Amazon as well, so people can find the package and the details. And also they are available here at the website of the Institute. You can find them what we call the Brain Awareness for Recovery Initiative body. There is a specific page for that, so you can find the material online. And also there are some videos about how these kind of packages are working and how people can use this material in different contexts. Okay, so that was one line of kind of intervention that we are working on in terms of how we can target these brain functions using cognitive interventions. But there is another line of interventions that I'm working on in my lab using what we call non-invasive brain stimulation technologies. And there are different non-invasive brain stimulation technologies. Right now we are working on different versions of these technologies. And if you go to the ISAM Neuroscience Interest Group YouTube channel, we have already put some of these kind of details about how these technologies could be helpful in the field of addiction medicine. I'm not going to go to the details about them, but just giving you some ideas about what is happening. If you are interested in the field, you can find a new consensus paper that we have recently published about using these technologies in addiction medicine and potential that we can use these technologies in addiction medicine. But just to give you a really brief overview about the potentials in the field, one of these technologies is called transcranial electrical stimulation. And we can use direct current or alternating current, or we can use random noise for doing the stimulation from the kind of external skull, trying to modulate things that are happening inside the brain. And the idea is when we do the stimulation from the cortical areas, we can modulate areas under kind of the cortex. So we can do some top-down modulation inside the brain. And we have done different studies for that. We have published different papers. I'm not going to go to the details about that, but that is kind of the idea that we have. And the new technology that we are right now working on, we call frontoparietal synchronization. So we target 2 sites over the kind of the cranium, and one on frontal area, the other on the parietal area, and we try to stimulate them with synchronized alternating current, hopefully being able to make them connected, because when the 2 areas in the brain are oscillating in the same rate, they could get connected. That's the kind of the basic idea of what we call frontoparietal synchronization. And there are different devices for that specific kind of synchronization. Right now, this is the kind of the model that we are using with what we call high definition transcranial electrical stimulation with alternating current. Right now we are running a trial for opioid users, so seeing how that kind of frontoparietal synchronization might be helpful in terms of bringing in control when people are exposed to drug cues. So we are still using the drug cue exposure paradigm. So we put the people inside the scanner, we activate the brain of the substance users while they are seeing drug cues, and then we do the frontoparietal synchronization to see, okay, can we give them more control on the craving that they have? So basically, it is the continuum of the exploration that we have been doing something like 15 years ago, trying to build up based on what we have been exploring about drug cue reactivity, and now we are going to the direction of how we can modulate that with things like frontoparietal synchronization methods. But one of the challenges that we have in the field is that there is a huge parameter space. We can do the stimulation with different frequencies. So we can do with something like 2 hertz, 4 hertz, 6 hertz, 10 hertz. So there is an a range of different frequencies. And these frequencies could be different among different patients or different people, because people have kind of inter-individual variations in terms of which frequency would work better for them. And also, there could be a sort of what we call the phase difference between these two sides, because when these two sides are going to be stimulated, we can make a phase difference in the process of stimulation, and the phase differences could also play a role because it could show how these kind of areas are directionally interacting to each other. So if one area is something like 5 degrees behind the other area, then it could be one direction of kind of information transfer, or if it is the other side would be ahead in terms of the phase, then the direction could be different. So we can use also different phase differences between these two sides. So you can imagine that is going to give us a huge parameter space. So every single point in this space could be a clinical trial, and that is really hard to do. So how we can kind of narrow down this parameter space, and how we can find the best protocol for each specific individual. That is the idea that we are right now exploring. And for being able to do that, we are developing a new setting inside the scanner to do the stimulation inside the scanners. And for being able to do that, we have started to kind of put together something like a phantom of a stimulation. We started with watermelons, and we put the electrodes over watermelons, and then we put the watermelons inside the scanner to do the stimulation inside the scanner. As you can see, we can clearly see inside the watermelon, and then we put them inside the scanner and do the stimulation. I was, to be honest, a little bit skeptical in terms of being able to do the stimulation inside the scanner, but it seems we can do that. So we can do the stimulation right now inside the scanner, and it seems that we can control the noise, and it is amazing that we can do that. And obviously, when we bring the kind of watermelons outside the scanner, they taste really good. So we just kind of usually eat the watermelon after the stimulation. That is the part of the ceremony of doing the stimulation. And obviously, after the kind of doing the stimulation inside the scanner, we need to do the human subject. And usually people, kind of students, they really like to do the stimulation on my head as the first step. So that is what we have been doing in terms of doing the stimulation inside the scanner on the real human subject head. And that is the setting that we have. So we put the subject inside the scanner. And that would give us a great opportunity to be able to do what we call a closed loop brain stimulation. So in this setting, we do the stimulation, we measure how these areas are connected to each other. We change the stimulation protocol, and we do the stimulation again to see if we can make the connection better, how we can optimize the connection with optimizing the stimulation protocol. So it's something like what we call the closed loop. And we search inside the space that I kind of introduced you, and we try to find the area that we have the maximum intensity of connection between these areas. That is something that we are doing right now. We have recruited one subject before the corona pandemic, and now we are hopeful to be able to kind of recruit the new subject probably the next week. So we are kind of still exploring the potentials for that. So that is the kind of new directions of individualizing the stimulation protocol based on kind of the large parameter space that we have. And this is one of the PhD students in kind of my team is working on that, Benny from Oklahoma University. So we are kind of developing the protocol. So those who are interested, we definitely would be happy to share the protocols and details about that. But technically, right now, what we are trying to do is combining the imaging side and the stimulation side together. So that is what we are trying to do right now. And we have realized that there are many technical details for that. So we realized that when we have this kind of large kind of space of technical details, we need to have a consortium. We need to have an international network of labs that are doing transcranial electrical stimulation, fMRI, together. So we have started to invite people who are active in the field, and we ended up having 54 different labs across the world interested to contribute to that network. So we made a network of labs across the world that are doing transcranial electrical stimulation and fMRI together. And we have quarterly webinars together discussing about the topics and the areas that we can kind of collaborate. And if somebody is interested to join that network, we definitely will be happy to help them technically to be able to run these things. And there are checklists that we are developing in these networks that those who are interested, they can join. Okay, so that is the second part in terms of, okay, we have, basically I can tell probably the third part, because the first part was the fMRI, imaging assessment part, cognitive interventions, and then brain stimulation. So that is how we try to have a package of doing assessments and also doing the intervention. That is the model that we try to expand. But it's not just about these things that I told you. There are some other aspects of addiction neuroscience that makes me really interested in the field. Something like 8 years ago, I was working with drug users, discussing about drug craving and helping them in terms of how they can control the drug craving. One of the patients told me that, Dr. Akhtiari, you are talking about drug craving and how we can control that. How can you control your own food craving? Because I was something like 20 kilograms, something like close to 50 pounds heavier than who I am right now. And I was thinking that he's right. I mean, I cannot control my food craving. How can I use the knowledge that I have about drug craving to change something inside myself? I'm just kind of telling people to change themselves. How can I change myself with the knowledge that they have? So I started to kind of think about how I can kind of use that knowledge. So I accepted 2 PhD students. We started to work on that, developing some interventions for food craving. And in that process, I started to kind of lose weight and started to run as well. And I was successful to kind of run long distances. This was one of the kind of long runs of something like 15K. So I realized that I can use the knowledge that I have about drug craving to use that for changing myself. And that is another really amazing part of drug addiction neuroscience, because it's not just about others, it's also about myself. How can I change myself in the kind of the context of impulses that we all have in different aspects of our life? So I put together my personal experience about that in a book that is hopefully going to be published soon, about kind of obesity and brain and how we can control our food craving. And I have been successful to run my first marathon in 2017. So that was kind of another step of realizing that I can change myself in this process. And that could be something that is not one step, it's just a continuous process of changing over the time. And now when I go to different places, when I travel to different places, I always have my sneakers with myself. So that is an important part of my travel. But wherever I go, I run in different places. And I'm in India, I'm in New Zealand, I'm in Canada. Wherever I have my sneakers and I run in different places. So that's a kind of a really important part of my life to change myself constantly based on the knowledge I'm learning from addiction neuroscience. And as soon as I can get time, I usually run kind of marathons, and I kind of ran Dallas Marathon in December. So I'm looking forward to run in Istanbul Marathon in November. Hopefully, I'm not sure if they are going to have the marathon in Istanbul in November this year, but I have already registered for that. So hopefully I can. I'm hopeful to be able to run that marathon in Istanbul as well. So just trying to wrap up what we have discussed today, and also kind of try to kind of answer questions and kind of continue the discussions with others that we have in the meeting. For those who are interested to be an addiction neuroscientist, if I want to give you 10 suggestions, what are the 10 suggestions I can give you in the field that might be helpful for you based on what I've learned during the last couple of years in kind of being active in the field of kind of addiction neuroscience? First of all, I think that you need to have a clear story for your long-term goals. You need to think about how my scientific exploration is going to help myself, my family, my society, my community. And in reality, addiction is a big problem across the world. Even just in US, we have more than 20 million people affected by substance use disorder. And if we add kind of comorbidities like depression, anxiety to that, something like 10 million of these people have also comorbid psychiatric disorders. And if we add alcohol to that picture, then that will be something like 60 million people affected by kind of binge drinking and alcohol kind of use problems. So that's a huge problem across the board. And the other, it's really hard to say it's a beauty, but it's a kind of important part of addiction is it is universal. So it's not just about US, it's not just about kind of Canada, it's also about Jamaica, it's about Iran, it's about India, it's about, I mean, that's the kind of problem that we have across the world. And that is something that you can make a really beautiful personal story for yourself, for your entire life. How can I help others? And how that beautiful story could be happening during kind of next 20, 30, 40 years of your career. So having what we call the prospective memory, a memory about the future, where you want to get there. Like what I'm trying to say, I've been doing during last something like 20 years is just trying to see how I might be able to help people with their drug craving. So that's the kind of the story that I have. And I'm going to follow this story for the next, hopefully, 30, 40 years of my career. So that is what I think that we need all to have, having a clear goal that motivates us and a clear, well-defined story about the future. We call that process future episodic thinking, making an episodic memory about the future of your life. The second part would be, or the second, really hard to say is that advice, it's just kind of my personal experience, my personal reflection. If you want to be successful in the field, you need to be attached to that. You need to see the beauty. You need to get excited about that. I'm kind of in the last few minutes of my talk, and the level of energy that I have right now is far above the level of energy that I had something like 1 hour ago. Because when I talk about what we are discussing about today, it just makes me energized. I'm just really excited about these topics that we are working on that. So you need to have that level of excitement about what you are working inside if you want to be successful in the field. And I really like about the addiction neuroscience is about the pragmatism of what we have in the field. So as Alex has mentioned, we had a special issue in Frontiers in Neuroscience recently about kind of neuroscience for prevention and recovery, and discussing about those topics in different papers. It has received something like 87,000 views so far. I was checking that today. And we have roadmap on that kind of special issue, as Alex has mentioned. And that roadmap, what we have been discussing is about how the field could be developed and how we are going to move forward in the field of addiction neuroscience. As you can see here, what we see in the field is we can have assessment and intervention together. As I kind of discussed today, we can have assessments, we can have interventions. And these two parts are going to go hand to hand to be able to change the future of addiction medicine. So we have different sort of assessments, cognitive assessments, something like Iowa gambling task that I told you, or we can have fMRI, drug cure activity fMRI. And we can have different sort of interventions, cognitive interventions, different sort of neural interventions like brain stimulation. So these two parts are kind of developing. And then they are interacting with each other. We target a specific function, that we have an assessment about that target. We try to modulate that. If it is going to work, that is great. If it is not working, then we need to change the assessment process. We need to change the intervention. So this is a sort of kind of closed loop or kind of a feedback loop of improvement, of targeting something, trying to change that. If it is working, that is great. If it's not working, going to the other target, trying to see if we can change that target, to see if we can move forward and change those, let's say, cue-induced craving or craving among drug users. That is how we try to make individualized, personalized interventions and also develop assessment methods that could give us a prediction about how this specific intervention is going to change different processes in the brain. So that is how the field is going to be really pragmatic in making a significant change in people's lives. And that is the beauty, that if you are getting excited about that, in that excitement, that joy would make you connected and attached to that. And that attachment is something that you need to be successful in the field of addiction neuroscience. The third, if you want to be successful, you need to work in teams. When we talk about addiction neuroscience, it's not just about addiction. We have people from the engineering side. We have people from the computer science side. We have people from public health domains. In the field of addiction neuroscience, if you want to be successful, you need to work with people from a wide range of different disciplines. You need to have people from the machine learning side to the field of, let's say, public economy, all those sociology. People need to work together. And that is what I have been doing during the last couple of years, just trying to work with people from a wide range of different disciplines. So you need to learn how to work with teams. You need to see how you can be successful in working inside the teams. And that is really important. I realize that there are many students that are not really skillful in terms of being able to manage their relationships inside a group of people. And that is bad. If you want to be successful in this field, you need to be able to see how you can communicate, how you can respect others, how you can put yourselves in others' shoes, and how you can provide kind of your knowledge for others in a way that they can understand, and then you can work in larger groups of people. And that is going to be critical for you to be successful in the field of addiction neuroscience. The fourth item is finding the right supervisor. And I've been really lucky in terms of having great supervisors in my scientific career. And I think it's really important also to maintain your good relationships with your supervisors. Even when you are graduated, you left the department, you are doing your own lab, you still need your supervisors. Spiritually, you need your supervisors. And that is one of the major advices that I have to the kind of the people in the field. If you want to be successful, find good supervisors and keep your connections with your supervisors for your entire life. They are basically the best friends that you can have in your entire life. So, and I've been really grateful of having great supervisors, and I cannot kind of find enough words to be able to kind of thank them for their support. And I'm still looking for new supervisors, and I'm kind of learning from people in kind of different fields. There are many kind of areas that I kind of call Alex and I ask Alex to help me to be my mentor, kind of helping me to kind of solve some of the problems that I have. I've learned a lot from Alex, others, I mean, senior figures in the field. So I'm still looking for the next mentors and see how I can learn from the next mentors in my scientific career. The fifth issue is I highly recommend people to try to join international network and consortiums. And right now with the corona situation, there are great potentials for that. So you can join different international networks, consortiums. Now most of them are online, so you can join these online teams of people who are working in the field. We have 4 major networks in the field on TSFMRI, Brain Stimulation Addiction Medicine, ISAM Neuroscience Interest Group, Cue-reactivity Initiative in the Enigma Addiction Working Group. And you are definitely welcome if you are interested to join these networks. Just send us an email. We'd definitely be happy to help you to join these networks. And there are many other networks across the world that you can join. So that is another really important kind of thing that you can do if you want to establish your career in the field. The 6th kind of suggestion is try to publish whatever you have, the ideas that you have, the data that you have. Try to be skillful in terms of putting out whatever you are doing, and let others to criticize you, let others to review what you are doing, let others kind of evaluate what you are doing. So try to be visible and try to be transparent and provide the resources that you have for others as well. As just a kind of an example, I was discussing with one of my students kind of a few years ago, Padide. We have been discussing about how to put the electrodes over the kind of subject's head. And Padide was discussing that, okay, we have different options. We can put the electrodes on the other side. So we realized that we have different montages that we can use. So we discussed, okay, let's kind of make something like a framework or a taxonomy word for different montages. And we developed a figure, as you can see here, in terms of what are the different montages. And we put different names for these different montages of electrode placement over the head for the transcranial electrical stimulation. And I suggested Paddy that we need to publish that. We need to put that in something like an opinion paper. And it has been published in Frontiers in Neuroscience something like 4 years ago. And I was checking that a few days ago, and I realized it has received something like 93 citations so far. So it seems that people like the idea that we had. It was just a simple idea, 1 figure, 2 pages paper, but it ended up having 93 citations, and people across the world, it seems that they like that as something like a framework, and now people are using that framework and that taxonomy that we developed for brain stimulation. So Padida was thinking that that's a really simple kind of idea. How can we publish that simple idea? I was thinking that, okay, I mean, that even the simple idea, we can publish that. And you can see that that simple idea is now receiving attention. And this is true. I have done several of these, let's say, opinion papers. And I realized that people can use even those opinions for their kind of scientific works. Right now, there are different platforms available for publishing what you are doing in terms of the protocols of the studies that you are doing, the ideas that you have, discussions that you are doing with your colleagues. Whatever you have, you can publish them. Based on the kind of the type of the material that you have, you can put them on bioRxiv, medRxiv, PsycArchive, Open Science Foundation platform. And it's important for you to learn how to use these platforms. And these are really strong tools that we didn't have something like 10 years ago. Now, we have all these resources right now available. If you check my Google Scholar page, and if you sort my publication based on the years, if you go for the 2020 publications, you can see something like half of the publications I have in 2020 are right now in medRxiv and PsycArchive. So they are not still published as something like peer-reviewed publications. They are in the review process. But before the publication, I usually put them on these preprint platforms to help people to share, to kind of know what we are doing. For example, right now we have done a survey about the corona situation across the world and substance use disorder with the ISAM people. Before its publication, we put that in a preprint on medRxiv. And I realized that we published that 24 hours ago, and during the last 24 hours, it received something like 5-6 different tweets. We have not even started to share that ourselves. People have started to kind of tweet about that. So even before this publication, people can see the material and they can use the material. And in the process of publication, I highly recommend you to be generous. I mean, by generosity, I mean share whatever you can give to others. If you can publish your entire database of drug cues, do it. If you can share your instruments, if you can share your database, whatever you publish, that is going to increase the quality of your scientific activities, and it's going to help others. And if you help others, then your scientific career would be much better over time. So be generous as much as you can. That is the strategy that we have. Whatever we have, we usually publish the entire, even analysis pipeline, the database, whatever we have, trying to help others to use the materials that we have developed. The 7th item, be in touch. What do I mean by be in touch? Let me just make an example for you. We had a panel April 21st, just a few months ago, about corona situation and brain stimulation trials, brain stimulation labs across the world in New York City brain stimulation meeting. I was the chair with Maron Bixon, and we were discussing with different colleagues about that. Right after the meeting, I received an email from a student, Adrian. I think Adrian is already online with us. I saw Adrian online. A student from Hungary. So Adrian sent me an email. I'm not sure if you can read the email. It's really small on the screen. Parian, could you read the email? Is it readable?
Somehow, yes. If I just zoom in with my eyes, I can.
Okay, yeah. If you see the email, in this email, Adrian sent me an email and told me that, okay, I'm only a PhD student. I'm interested to contribute in the ideas that you have. Can I contribute to the idea of, let's say, putting together a paper about this issue that we have been discussing in the panel? I wrote back to Adrian that we are going to write a paper, but we decided not to involve any student, even a postdoc student. We decided to just have the paper with the PIs, principal investigators from different labs across the world. But I told Adrian that, okay, I mean, you can be in the process. I can put you in the circulation, but I cannot give you the authorship for that paper because we decided not to involve the students for that specific paper. And she accepted. She was just thinking that it's a great opportunity for her to contribute and just be involved in the process. But I really liked what she was providing and the ideas that she had and her commitment to the process. So she ended up being one of the authors of the paper that we have recently published just a few weeks ago about the process. And I realized that because her contribution was significantly enough to be one of the authors. And I convinced others that I need to put Adrian as one of the authors in the paper. So she just sent me an email. We did the communication for a few weeks, and it ended up to a paper. So do not think that, I mean, I'm not going to contact others. I'm not going to send emails. I know that Adrian probably has sent something like several emails to many others that they have never replied, but sometimes it works. So I think that it's critically important to be in touch with those who are in the field and who are active in the field, and you can definitely find opportunities to work with them. So do not think that, I mean, those people are really hard to find. And I'm a junior scientist in the field. I mean, even those who are really big figures in the field, you can even work with those people if you find the right time and you find the right tone, how to write an email and how to show that you are an active, enthusiastic person and you can contribute to the process. 8. I think that you need to have basically 3 major skills, and all of these 3 skills start with C. You need to have strong conceptual skills, know what is happening from the conceptual point of view, different brain functions, how they are involved in addiction neuroscience. You need to have communicative skills, like what Adrian has, in terms of how to communicate, how to publish, how to write something. And third skill would be the computational skill. You need to be computationally skillful. You need to be computationally strong. Right now, without being computationally strong, you cannot be a scientist. So you need to know how machine learning methods would work. You need to know how to work with softwares like R. You need to do this be able to do the scriptings in things like Python, R. So you need to be computationally strong to be a good scientist in the field right now. So these three major kind of skills: conceptual, communicative, and computation. You need to have all these three skills to be successful in the field. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very hard to do. I'm going to start a new cognitive neuroscience course, online cognitive neuroscience course, starting hopefully from August 23rd. It's going to be an online course. I'm going to do that on Sundays because I'm really busy during the week with my kind of research projects. So we are going to have that on Sundays. For those who are interested to join, you definitely would be happy. I mean, you'd be kind of welcome to join us. You can there is an email for that. You can find it, just send an email on Fundamentals of Cognitive Neuroscience 2020 @gmail. And if you are interested, you definitely would be kind of, we have a kind of screening process for that. You need to send us your CV, but we will see if, you are really interested, you definitely will be welcome to join us on that cognitive neuroscience course. It's going to be 14 weeks of kind of discussing about these conceptual, computational, and to some extent kind of communicative skills for that course. Okay, item 9. I'm going to the end of that, so I'm just going to kind of get it done. I think that if you are going to be successful in the field, you need to know those who are active in the field. You need to know scientists in the field. You need to know who is who in the field. What are the things that are happening in the field? You need to know the key figures in the field and follow them in Twitter, in different places, and follow their publications. Right now, you can do you can follow up major scientists in things like Google Scholar. So you can kind of develop a list of the people you follow and kind of read their publications. So it's important to develop a list of people that you think that are going to be critical figures in the field and follow their publications. And that follow-up is going to definitely be helpful for you. I've published a 2-volume textbook on addiction neuroscience in a pragmatic way. That is going to be a good resource for those who are interested to know the major figures in the field. These 2 volumes have 38 chapters with 156 authors across the world from 17 different countries. So you can, in these 38 chapters, you can find the major figures in the field who are active in the field. And I will definitely be happy to send you a copy from that book series if you send me an email. That is a good kind of way of finding key figures in the field if you are interested. Okay, the 10th item and the last one. I think it's going to be critically important to keep your connections to your roots. In the kind of the series of speakers that we have in this talk series, you can see that most of the kind of the key figures that we have are mainly from US, UK. They're working in different labs in major universities. But in reality, it's critically important for all of us to do not forget our main roots. So even being in US now for 5 years, I'm still highly connected with my kind of colleagues in Iran. We have recently put together a paper about the history and the evolution process of addiction treatment in Iran. Before Islamic Revolution, after Islamic Revolution, in 4 different waves in a historical kind of perspective, and the plans for the future. So I've not kind of forgotten that I'm from Iran, and I still keep the connection, even with the current situation and the political situation you can imagine, with all the sanctions and complexities in US. It's really hard to keep the connections with kind of scientists in Iran, but I'm doing my best, trying not to be caught in the middle of the political conflict between these two countries. In both sides, it's going to be it's basically complex in both Iranian and kind of US side. But I'm trying to do my best, kind of respecting all the kind of the red lines that are there out of my control. But I'm trying to kind of keep my connections with people and try to do not forget the roots that I have in Iran and keep my connections there. I travel across the world in different workshops in different places. Like I had a workshop recently in New Zealand or in many different places. But I'm still really interested to what I'm doing with kind of in underdeveloped areas, with kids, even with kind of least affluent parts of the kind of different countries, including Iran, and kind of running educational programs for tribal leaders, religious leaders in kind of tribal areas, and trying to keep the connections to those who are in need. And the really good thing about addiction and addiction neuroscience, it's not just about kind of a specific part of the world. Wherever you go, addiction is there, and you can help people across the world wherever you go. And that's a great opportunity, and I'm really enjoying that, being able to help people not only in the affluent parts of the world, but also in the kind of least developed or least kind of affluent parts of the world. So that is a really important part, and I highly recommend people to be really kind of thinking about keeping their connections, and also thinking about they can be really great scientists in their own countries. Today I realize that we have in the meeting, we have people from India, from Jamaica, from different countries. And I'm sure that they can be really great scientists in their own countries. And I really don't like to encourage people to immigrate to kind of other countries across the world. I highly recommend people to remain in their own countries and do the great job that they can do and serve their people in their own countries. And I'm definitely happy, especially kind of help these people who are working in their own countries. And I'm definitely kind of encouraging those people to remain and support their own communities. Okay, that is the kind of all the 10 items that I was interested to discuss about, and I added a cartoon at the end to mention that I really like to use cartoons to be able to communicate with people, kind of communicate science in a really simple language. So that's another aspect of kind of being a scientist, to be able to communicate what you know with people in a really simple language. That is another kind of important aspect of being successful in the field. Okay, good. So I try to be on time as much as I was able, and I still, fortunately, we still have time to kind of discuss about some of the topics that we had today. Thank you very much for your attention, and sorry that it was so long. Hopefully, kind of, we will have the next speakers. The next kind of meeting, we will have Rita Goldstein, who is a really kind of inspiring figure in the field. I've learned a lot from Rita, and I'm really happy that she has accepted to be one of the speakers in this talk series. I'm really looking forward to learn about kind of her talk in 1 month, hopefully in August. So I highly encourage you to join us in the next talk in August with Rita Goldstein. I promise you that is going to be a much better talk than my talk. So hopefully kind of we will have great scientists for the next talks, and we have already kind of lined up the scientists for the next talk. Hopefully it's going to be an interesting series of talks. Good. So now let me just stop sharing my screen. I ask people to open their videos, and then we can kind of talk and discuss about the things that we probably can discuss about together. Alex, you are going to lead that. Now I can see that there are key. Oh, I can see right now Jean-Luc. Okay, Jean-Luc. Hello, Jean-Luc. Now I can see. Okay, Amir, Dr. Rezvani from Duke. Oh, great colleagues and great mentors and supervisors. I learned a lot from these people. I'm really, really happy to have you here. Alex, you are going to kind of lead the session.
Yes, thank you very much, Hamid, and for a very inspiring intervention there, and thank you for sharing some of your personal experiences as well, and very valuable advice. I think the 10, I call them the mantra, the 10 suggestions, advice that you gave is very much, for me, emulates very much to, how I've not survived, but became resilient in a world which is competitive, which sometimes makes you think you need to do things on your own in order to achieve satisfying career. There are some questions on the chat here. If we can start with those questions, if that's okay, and then we'll open it up to others. But Harsimar said, if a researcher has previously not worked in the area of addiction, but has experience in the field of neuropsychology, what would you recommend? How can such a researcher start their work?
I think that's probably an interesting also discussion that Alex could kind of contribute significantly to that. I think that that is exactly the sort of background that I started with to go to the addiction neuroscience. I started to kind of work with understanding about how ventromedial prefrontal cortex and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex could be evaluated, and how kind of injuries of these basically important brain functions could be assessed with the different sorts of behavioral tasks. And I started from that point, moving from that point to the field of addiction neuroscience. And I think that right now there are definitely great opportunities for those who are from, let's say, neuropsychology side to be able to move to the field of addiction neuroscience. And we know that kind of technically those who are suffering from drug use disorder, they have significant kind of neuropsychological problems. And also it's going to be interestingly important that right now the, let's say, more classic approach to neuropsychology is changing towards more, let's say, human cognitive neuroscience, and having a sort of interesting combination between classic cold functions of that are important for neuropsychology in terms of the memory, attention, towards having more, let's say, hot cognitive functions in terms of, let's say, emotions, motivation, impulses, control, those things to be integrated to each other when we talk about neuropsychology of substance use disorder. And there are interesting opportunities to have, not only from the clinical neuropsychological point of view, but also from the cognitive psychology point of view, and combining these areas together in terms of developing new treatments for substance use disorder. And I think that there are definitely interesting discussions in terms of how substance use disorder is making toxicity inside the brain, and how we might be able to use the ideas of neuropsychological rehabilitation for the field of addiction medicine, and bring and develop new treatments that are focused based on the, let's say, brain rehabilitation ideas to improve outcomes in addiction medicine. So I can see great potentials for that. I'm sure that Jean-Luc would be talking about the toxicity and kind of how different molecular pathways are involved in terms of the toxicity in substance use disorder. Hopefully Jean-Luc would be the fourth speaker in this talk series from NIDA. And I've learned a lot from Jean-Luc. I have been in his talks in different places, learning a lot about his work in terms of how different kind of pathways are involved in terms of the toxicity, brain toxicity in drug addiction. And then the idea of how we can use different sort of neuropsychological rehabilitation to mitigate those injuries. That is going to be an exciting topic.
Just to add, Harsimar, the basic thing you could do is look at what the network where you live in, the area you live in. I am pretty sure there's someone who's thinking on the same lines and would want to do some research with you in the field of addiction. So just open up, communicate. You'll be surprised that usually the people who you need to work together are less than a mile away from you. I'm always pleasantly surprised on that. There's another question here from Neshat Amadi. When you are talking about changing or modifying the behavior, did you find any evidence that people are now somehow addicted to the new habits, good healthy habits, positive addiction? Ahmed, any opinion on that?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting kind of thing. Another interesting thing about addiction, neuroscience. Sometimes when we talk about addiction, we just think about, let's say, the negative side of some negative connotation about addiction. But we know that when we talk about addiction, we are talking about how we develop habits. And the habits could have definitely potential. So because basically what we are talking about kind of changes in these brain functions, there are definitely some functionalities for these specific brain processes. And there are definitely some positive aspects of these capacities for people to get connected, to get attached, to develop habits that are going to be helpful for us to maintain a balanced life. So I definitely see, and for example, when we develop the habit of running, you realize that you can definitely experience things like withdrawal. So when you stop running, you can obviously see that that is exactly the experience that you have in terms of seeing how you can develop a sort of dependencies without those harmful negative consequences. So that's definitely something that I experienced, and I think that is something that you can kind of appreciate in terms of kind of learning from addiction neuroscience. And I think it would be nice if others who are in the meeting, if they have other ideas to share with us, that would be fantastic. Jean-Luc, Amir, others, senior or junior figures in the field, that would be nice if you also if you have ideas or thoughts, that would be nice to share your ideas with us.
So I think that's an invitation to Jean-Luc, or if that's okay with you, Jean?
I can say something. I think the discussion we're having about which is really a brain repair, I think that's going to be very, very, very important going forward as far as addiction neuroscience is concerned. I think a lot of the approaches are now trying to stop people to take drugs, but I think repairing the brain of those who've been exposed to methamphetamine, cocaine, even opiates, I think repairing their brain is going to help them to do better in terms of follow-up, in terms of continuing cognitive-based treatment. Without repairing the brain, I think it's going to be very difficult to get people to stop taking the brain, really help them develop better habits instead of the bad habits. That's one thing I wanted to say when you were discussing the cognitive rehabilitation.
Amir, would you like to add something else in this conversation?
You're on mute.
Microphone, you're on mute. Amir, you are on mute. Okay. There's a couple of other questions, Hamid, and quite interesting questions here. One of them is saying that what is the place for neuroscientific interventions on emotion regulations in order to reduce craving in addicts, in your point of view?
Yeah, I think that that's a really interesting question in terms of when we talk about emotion regulation, it's just something like a broader sort of interventions
that could not only be used among drug users, but also could be used among, different clinical population. But there is definitely an interesting overlap with what we talk about emotion regulation and what we call kind of impulse control or craving control. There are definitely lots of interesting overlaps between what we call affective neuroscience and addiction neuroscience. And that is another really interesting kind of part about addiction neuroscience, that it's basically covers the ideas that we have in the field of affective neuroscience and emotions and how we regulate emotions and how we might be able to use those strategies from emotion regulation to the field of addiction neuroscience, not only from just the emotional part of it, because controlling emotion is going to be important for addiction recovery, but also the cross interaction between emotion and motivation and how we define craving as something like in between of having both emotional and affective aspects and also motivational aspects that would be combining together to develop the feeling that we have as drug craving. And that would make really interesting potentials for interventions.
Thank you, Hamid. There are two other questions. I think it's important, and then perhaps we'll have 5 minutes for everyone else who would want to chip in. But I think these are important. Is that one of them is talking about how about branching out, Hamid, into researching these issues that you've presented in the field of schizophrenia, where individuals tend to have addictions such as nicotine addiction. Have you ever thought in your future episodic memory that you're going to branch out into other areas?
Yeah, definitely there are interesting areas. I mean, for example, you are talking about nicotine, and here we have. I mean, Amir Rezvani. I'm not sure Amir is interested to discuss about his work on nicotine, but nicotine is a really, really interesting topic. But meanwhile, you can see that how kind of when you want to go to all these kind of interesting topics, it's going to be really complex because there are minor details in each of these areas. So when you want to be a really good scientist, sometimes it's really getting too much complex to be a researcher, not only in the field of, let's say, methamphetamine and opioids, and also being able to do the research in the field of alcohol and nicotine and all those areas. People need to have their own specialties. So even in the field of drug cue reactivities, we have people that are doing nicotine cue reactivity. And there are interesting differences between nicotine cue reactivity and opioid cue reactivity and alcohol cue reactivity. And you start to develop those minor details. For example, when you are talking about things like alcohol craving, people are completely satiated in terms of the kind of the drinks, or they are not thirsty at all. It's really hard to develop alcohol craving among those people. So they need to be a little bit thirsty and water deprived to be able to develop the alcohol craving. So there are minor details. And I've learned that sometimes it just gets really complex to be an expert in all those details. So sometimes you need to be really focused in one specific area. And there are teams that are just focused on how to manage nicotine dependency in the psychiatric populations, and mainly schizophrenia. And what is the important role of nicotine in terms of the cognitive performance of these people. And sometimes they discuss about, I'm not sure if probably Amir could tell us in terms of, is it even a really good idea to deprive them from nicotine while they are using the nicotine as something like a cognitive enhancer for their brain functions?
Thank you, Hamid. Yes, Amir?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Hamid, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I learned so much. And about the schizophrenia and nicotine, as you mentioned, a good portion of people with schizophrenia smoke, and they smoke heavily. I mean, they inhale they want to make sure that they get that nicotine inside. And one reason is probably they have a nicotinic receptor deficiency, and so they use nicotine or smoking as a self-medication. So that's why they use it. Most people with mental disorders try to use drugs as a self-medication, at least temporary. So schizophrenia is one of those. And nicotine replacement or nicotine therapy for improving cognition. I'm not a clinician. I am a basic scientist working with rats. And we have shown that nicotinic compounds, nicotine or any nicotinic compound similar to nicotine can improve cognition and attention in our hands. So there's a lot of evidence for nicotine, but not smoking. I want to make it clear, not smoking, because when we smoke about 7,000 chemicals in cigarette. I'm talking about just nicotine, which is one of the most psychoactive compounds in cigarette.
Thank you, Amir. Thank you. Now, I think it's sorry, we have Jean. Yeah.
Let's say something really quickly about switching field. I have to agree with Ahmed. I mean, there are a lot of people doing just schizophrenia work, trying to do drug abuse and schizophrenia work. If you start out with drug abuse, I myself started with schizophrenia. Trying to do the combination was almost impossible. So I think it's really very important to stay focused so that you can develop a name for yourself in one particular field. Right now, I'm thought of as the methamphetamine person, but I'm going to stay there. I'm not going to try to become the expert of it all, because that doesn't work at all.
That's good, very good, wise advice. But equally, I suppose, do not stop reading and learning what other people are researching as well. Okay, so we're 15 minutes late, but we have 5 minutes here. I think I'll leave it up to the floor here. Perhaps there are some questions, some comments from participants. Usually there's silence in the beginning, but then when we get going, it's pretty good. Or else, if no one talks, I will just, do the lottery, so to speak, and ask someone who not necessarily I know, but might want to contribute to this. So be careful. It's better if we start a conversation. People are leaving. Okay. All right. I'll start with a good friend who's been a great host to me when I visited a beautiful country called Iran. So Mehran, your views, your reflection as a young person interested in neuroscience.
Hi, Alex. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Dr. Well, first of all, thanks a lot, Dr. Ikhtiyari, for this perfect presentation. I've been always learning a lot from you, and that was a great one. So, Alex, did you want me to just say my opinion, or I ask questions?
Yeah, please. Please say your opinion. I'm sure you have great opinions.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm still a very young student, and I'm trying to learn. But what I've learned so far is that honestly, I knew nothing, and I just jumped into the field with the perfect supervision of Dr. Ikhtiyari. So that is what I learned. I just showed that I tried to show that I'm interested in the field, and so first I tried to learn some basic things, and then Dr. Ikhtiyari tried to involve me in some studies, and that is how I began to learn something and probably do a research study.
I should tell that I met Mehran in one of the congresses in Iran, something like 3 years ago. So after one of my talks, he came and he introduced himself, and he told me that he's interested to work in the field of addiction neuroscience. And he's a medical student in University of Yazd, which is a city in the middle of the country. And we have been in touch by just basically emails and Skype and the video conferences. We have, I think we met something like, in total, something like 10 hours in the last kind of 3 years. I mean, in person, we met in a few meetings, but we have been virtually connected. And I think that right now, Mehran, we have something like 3 or 4 papers together. He's working on some of the databases that we have developed in Iran, doing some analysis on the fMRI connectivities. So all those connections could be happening in just a simple kind of email, and then people can start to work together, even when they are far from each other. So it's not just about working close to each other in the same city. People can get connected and can work together. Right now, with these resources that are available, they can work together far from each other. And even they, for example, right now we have Adrian online right now. We have never met in person. We have just been in touch by emails and kind of just in the virtual meetings. But I really enjoyed how Adrian is thinking about the processes, or how Mehran is committed. When Mehran is supposed to write something or read something, he definitely would do that. I mean, he would definitely do that in just few hours. So you can see that how, even after few kind of communication, you can learn about the personality of these people and enjoy from working with these really nice people across the board. So that I think that kind of these are great opportunities right now that we can work together and learn from each other. And I hope that kind of having people together in this specific talk series, right now we have, I mean, key figures like kind of Jean-Luc, that is an inspiring figure in the field and a leader in the field. People like Alex, who is doing a really great job in the field. Amir was talking about his personal experiences. We have lots of other people right now. I'm hopeful that this talk series would provide opportunities for people to get connected and work together in a more pragmatic way in the future.
Okay. One last comment from the younger generation, if that's okay, Hamed. I'm looking at Adrienne Holzer. Can you introduce yourself, if that's okay?
First of all, thank you for this talk. It was really inspiring, and I'm always amazed by your point of view, how the way you think about how to work with other people, because it's really inspiring that you give opportunities for us, for young scientists. And I just really like to thank you for the opportunities and for letting me know that there's this lecture, because I really learned a lot from you.
And which country are you working right now, Adrienne?
I'm in Hungary.
In Hungary. Good. It's an opportunities of, working together without any frontiers of any sort, any obstacles. Okay, last but not least, I'm going to ask Parnian. Your views. You're doing a master's in neuroscience, yes?
No, I just graduated from my clinical psychology degree, but I'm doing my main research into studies in the field of addiction neuroscience, as you know. And yeah, so I'm just quite new in the field, but I'm quite interested. And yeah, I'm quite thankful to the whole ISAM team, because it was a whole new world to me, to get to know other people, Dr. Ikhtiyari, all of you. And, I've conducted my thesis in the field of addiction neuroscience. My drug of interest is cannabis. I use the fMRI, and I'm learning a lot from all of you guys, and I'm quite thankful to all of you, to the technology, above all, that we can be quite connected these days, and we can learn from each other. And yeah, we young researchers are quite grateful. And yeah, way to go.
Okay, I think it's time to conclude the first of many lectures. Knowing Hamed, he's already thinking of the next, not these next 12 lectures or 6 lectures for this year, but he's already thinking about what's going to happen the year after. And that's because it's fundamental based around enthusiasm, around something that Hamed has clearly in the last hour or so shown he's not only enthusiastic, but he believes that what he's doing and spending most of his time, his life around making a difference to people. And I think once you start thinking the way Hamed thinks, nothing is impossible. If you think addiction neuroscience is something that's well known, well evidenced, we have all the right papers to do something about this and change the way people think and people behave. I think whoever thinks like that is not really the right person to do any type of research or even see any patients, because we realized that humility is one of the major important things in knowing, that through your time and energy, you're going to increase the knowledge base that is so much needed, especially in addiction neuroscience. So can I take the opportunity to thank Hamed, Barnian, the organizers for NIG, for the first monthly ISAM-NIG talk series. And again, hopefully, you will tell your friends and colleagues to join in for the next series, the speaker will be Rita Goldstein, and it will be on the 20th of August. And before we meet again, please do keep yourself safe. We're living in a bizarre world right now, but we still manage, in spite of everything, we still manage to meet and spend 2 excellent hours together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mitch.